In the early days of policing, the evolution of equipment such as the murder bag came about through trial and error. And though procedures at scenes of crimes have now dramatically changed, and a murder bag as such is rarely seen, its influence is still apparent. And it was methodical, painstaking policing and forensic analysis that eventually solved the crime that involved poison pen letters, a bomb and a murder. One of the most complex crimes of recent years. On the 30th of April 1984, an alarm rang in a police station near Horton, a village in the west of England. The alarm was connected to nearby Widdenhall Farm, home of Graham Backhouse, a local farmer who had been given police protection following a hate campaign against him. Police rushed to the farm where they were confronted by an horrific scene.
As I walked into the kitchen, I looked up the hallway to the right-hand side, and there I saw the body of Colin Beadle Taylor. And as I approached him, I could see that he was dead. There was nothing I could do for him. And the other side of Colin Beadle Taylor, in another room, was Graham Backhouse. To me, he looked seriously injured because there was blood on his face, there was blood across his chest. He was sobbing. He was bent double, almost in a fetal position. And I went to his assistance.
According to Backhouse, it was a case of attempted murder by Beadle Taylor and his desperate self-defence, which resulted in him shooting Beadle Taylor with his shotgun. In the month before the shooting, Backhouse had contacted the police about numerous threats against him. A sheep's head had been impaled on the fence of his farm, with the words attached, "You next." He also listed a string of threatening phone calls and poison pen letters that had been sent to him, but then matters became violent. On the morning of April 9th, Backhouse had asked his wife Margaret to drive into town and pick up some medication for their livestock. As her own car wasn't roadworthy, she took her husband's. The moment she turned the ignition key, there was an explosion. Margaret's legs were terribly injured and her body violently lacerated. Her husband was in a distant shed, playing his radio at full volume. No one heard her screams of agony. When Backhouse eventually ran to the yard, he tried to cover his distraught wife with a blanket. Later, surgeons spent hours removing hundreds of lead pellets from her body. Explosive experts examining the burnt-out car discovered that an unsophisticated but deadly bomb had been hidden underneath the driver's seat. A length of steel pipe packed with nitroglycerin and shotgun pellets wired up to the ignition. But the driver's seat had deflected the force downwards, and though Margaret Backhouse suffered terrible injuries, they could have been much worse.
I attended Widdenhill Farm shortly after the explosion. I saw Mr. Backhouse there, and he was quiet, slightly withdrawn, shocked, and obviously very concerned about his wife, blaming himself, inasmuch as the bomb was meant for him and his wife was unnecessarily maimed.
The police knew that Backhouse wasn't popular in Horton. The former hairdresser had only been farming for 2 years and was known to have run up debts. This and his reputation as a womanizer fueled local gossip.
I think during his lifetime, Graham had made a few enemies, so people in the village thought that somebody was after him.
In fact, Backhouse himself had told the police that his main suspect was Colin Beadle Taylor.
Colin Beadle Taylor lived a short distance away from Widdenhill Farm, and there had been a few incidents where there'd been unrest between Graham Backhouse and Colin. But there was also a traffic accident where Colin Beadle Taylor's son was fatally injured, and the vehicle that he collided with belonged to Graham Backhouse. And it was necessary for us to provide some form of protection at the farm, not only to protect Mr. Backhouse, but to protect his family. And to this end, there was a 24-hour police guard placed at Widdenhill Farm. Now, this was fine until Mr. Backhouse decided that he didn't want police presence there, and we were obliged to remove the police constable. But we did insist on having a panic button in the house and we also recorded his telephone conversations.
And now, 3 short weeks after the car bomb that had nearly killed his wife, the police were faced with a murder.
When I heard about the shooting, my instant reaction was, what's he done this time? And gut feelings can be dangerous. We have to be aware that that uneasiness is there, but to behave in a professional manner and to look for hard evidence.
Backhouse gave his account of the dreadful events. He told police how Bedell Taylor had called round at 7:30 that evening to repair a wooden chest, but had gone suddenly mad. After admitting that he'd planted the car bomb because Backhouse had caused a car crash that had killed his son, he then attacked Backhouse with a Stanley knife. Backhouse described how he fought off Bedell Taylor before running to his hall to fetch a gun. As Bedell Taylor caught up with him, still wielding the knife, he shot him.
My initial reaction, having attended the scene, was to ensure that the scene was preserved, completely undisturbed, for the forensic scientists to come in and make an examination.
But experts who studied the scene of crime at Backhouse's farm were suspicious.
Colin Bedell Taylor was clutching a Stanley knife, and this was one of the points we needed to clarify with the forensic experts, that if indeed he had attacked someone with the knife and had been shot, would he have continued to hold it, or would he have dropped it?
I could see that the palm of his hand was totally covered in blood. My analysis of that blood showed me that it was his own blood and not that from Mr. Backhouse, and therefore the most likely explanation was that it had occurred after he had been shot and he clutched at his chest. In doing so, at that point, he could not have had the knife in his hand, otherwise he would not have had them totally covered in blood. And therefore it appeared as though the knife had gone back into his hand after he had been shot.
The knife had the initials BT scratched on it, and at first glance was assumed to be the property of the dead man. But when officers searched Bedell Taylor's house, they noticed something odd. All the tools in his workshop now, he had been a skilled carpenter, were carefully engraved BT, unlike the crudely scratched initials on the Stanley knife.
But the blood staining in the kitchen was formed by drips of blood that had fallen apparently vertically to the floor, forming nice circular stains. That struck me as being odd. I would have anticipated that if there had been violent movement around that room, the stains would have not formed circular spots. They would have been elongated as the blood was projected from someone moving forcefully and violently around the room. The third point of interest was that Mr. Backhouse had then taken a shotgun from the bottom of the staircase. At this point he was apparently bleeding heavily from a facial wound. In all probability his hands were covered in blood, and yet this gun had no blood on it at all.
The convincing scenario that Backhouse had constructed to cover up the murder was now crumbling due to forensic evidence. Graham Backhouse was charged with the murder of Colin Bedell Taylor and the attempted murder of his wife. At the trial, the prosecution outlined a web of lies and deceptions. In early March, Backhouse had doubled the insurance on Margaret's life to £100,000. He had then invented the hate campaign against himself before planting the car bomb designed to kill his unsuspecting wife. It was suggested that with the insurance money, he had hoped to cover his mounting business debts. When this plot failed, he then attempted to divert suspicion from himself. The court heard how he had lured Bedell Taylor to his house with the sole intention of murdering him. Having shot Bedell Taylor, he cut himself with the Stanley knife and placed it in the dead man's hand.
I was completely taken in. When I got there, there was obviously Colin Bedell Taylor was dead. Backhouse to me looked seriously injured. I didn't know at that time that they were self-inflicted wounds. That was only found out later on. As the case unfolded, I realised that I'd been duped.
I interviewed Mrs. Backhouse on a number of occasions. She was always very helpful, always very pleasant under the circumstances, reserved, and I'm sure that she was most reluctant to accept the fact that her husband had tried to kill her. Before the trial actually started, one of her relations confided that it had taken all this time for Mrs. Backhouse to accept that her husband had tried to murder her, and by that time she had accepted that fact.
By a majority of 10 to 2, Graham Backhouse was found guilty on both charges and sentenced to 2 terms of life imprisonment. Graham Backhouse died in 1994 whilst in prison. Tragically, his wife died a year later, at the age of 48. As the cases of Patrick Mahon and Graham Backhouse show, the early procedures that were established with the invention of the murder bag are still relevant. Painstaking police work from the scenes of the crime onwards, and the expert opinions of forensic medicine can solve even the most complex cases. And there are many more such tales to be told from inside the Crime Museum.